Pay the rent or get out. My son-in-law, Mark, spat the words at me. He said it like he was throwing away trash. Cold. Final. We were standing in the kitchen I built with my own 2 hands. My daughter Sarah, my little girl, just watched. She chewed on her thumbnail, silent. They thought I was a weak old man, a burden. They thought they held all the cards. They were about to learn a hard lesson. You don't kick out the landlord. If you're listening to this, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're watching from. It helps to know I'm not alone in this crazy world. My name is Arthur, and I need to tell you how my sanctuary became my prison. It started long before that night. It started with the smell of sawdust. That scent always calmed me. It was the smell of my life, building, home. I was in my workshop in the garage. Even out there, I could feel the tension radiating from the main house, thick like humidity before a storm. I wiped grease on my worn rag. I heard Mark's voice, loud, sharp. It had that metallic edge, the sound he made when he was talking about money. And lately, money was all he talked about. I hesitated before going inside. This house was mine. I built it 35 years ago. I was a contractor. I poured the foundation. Every nail I hammered was a promise to my late wife, Eleanor. A promise of stability, safety. But standing there, I knew that stability was cracking. The foundation was shaking, and I wasn't sure if I could fix it this time. When Eleanor passed 5 years ago, the silence was deafening. The rooms felt too big, the memories too heavy. I was rattling around in an empty museum of my past. So when Sarah and Mark said they were struggling, I opened my doors. Mark's business ventures always failed, spectacularly. They were drowning in debt. It seemed logical. Live here rent-free. Save money. I would have the noise of my grandchildren, Timmy and Susie, filling the silence. It seemed like a perfect solution. I thought I was saving them. I didn't realize I was inviting a storm into my home. I finally walked into the kitchen. The tension hit me like a physical wall. Mark and Sarah were sitting at the oak dining table. The one I built. Mark was tapping impatiently on his tablet. Tap, 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 blue light reflected on his sharp features. Sarah stared at her hands. Chewing that thumbnail again. Evening, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Mark didn't look up. We need to talk, Arthur. My stomach tightened. He only called me Arthur when he wanted something, or when he was angry. Usually both. All right, I said, leaning against the counter. What's on your mind? He set the tablet down. A sharp click echoed in the silent kitchen. The financials, Arthur. The cost of running this household. He paused for effect. It's unsustainable. Unsustainable. The word hung in the air, cold and accusing. A word he used to make himself sound smart. A word he used to make me feel small. The changes started small. Insidious. Things you could ignore until you couldn't. For the first year, it was good. I watched the kids. I fixed things. They were grateful. Then the whispers started. The subtle shifts in power. It began about a year after they moved in. I came home from a small contracting job. My knees ached. I walked into the living room and stopped. Eleanor's favorite reading chair was gone. The worn floral one she loved. The one she sat in every evening. My heart pounded. Sarah? Where's Mom's chair? Sarah flinched. She was folding laundry on the new sofa. Cold, gray fabric. Bought on credit, I was sure. Oh, Dad, it didn't match the new furniture. Where is it? I demanded, my voice tight. It's in the garage, Dad, Mark said, walking past me without looking. He opened the fridge, grabbing a craft beer. It was an eyesore, my wife's favorite place. I said nothing. I just swallowed the hurt. But that wasn't the worst part. Then came the workshop invasion. My space. My sanctuary. I went out one Saturday morning to work on a birdhouse for Susie. I stopped dead in the doorway. My tools, organized over decades, were shoved into a corner, piled up like junk, covered with a dusty tarp. In their place sat a massive, expensive rowing machine, gleaming metal, untouched. The dust on my tools felt like dirt on a coffin. I found Mark in the kitchen, making an elaborate espresso. The machine hissed loudly. Mark, my tools. I started, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. You didn't even look up. Had to make room, Arthur, he said, sipping his coffee. I need a space to work out. You weren't using half that stuff anyway. He gestured around the kitchen. This is a shared space now. We all have to compromise. But it felt like I was the only one doing the compromising. I let it slide. I wanted peace. But peace bought with silence is never truly peace. The biggest blow came a few months later. The master bedroom. The room I shared with Eleanor for 3 decades. The room where we dreamed, laughed, and cried. Sarah approached me one afternoon, her eyes averted. Dad, we need to talk about the rooms. What about them? I asked, suspicion creeping in. Well, Mark and we need more space, she said, her voice bright and fake. The master bedroom is so much bigger, and the attached bathroom. I stared at her. My little girl, asking me to leave the heart of my home. You want me to move out of my room? The words felt surreal. It's just more practical, she whispered, chewing on her thumbnail. The guest room downstairs is nice, cozy, and easier on your knees. No stairs. They framed it as concern, but I knew what it was. They wanted the space. They wanted the power, nice, cozy, small, away from everyone. I packed my things that night. I lay in the small guest bed, listening to them laughing upstairs. In my room, I felt like a ghost in my own life, a tenant in my own house. I tried to make it work. I watched the kids after school. I fixed the leaky faucet. I replaced the old water heater. I was the handyman, the built-in babysitter. I thought I was contributing. I thought I was needed. I was wrong. Mark started making comments. Little jabs disguised as jokes. Must be nice. Nice be retired, Arthur, he'd say while I was loading the dishwasher. No stress. No real responsibilities. No responsibilities. I was paying for half the groceries. I was covering the utilities from my pension, but he didn't see that. He only saw what I wasn't giving him. He only saw the burden. The tension escalated around money. Always money. Mark would leave bills on the counter, highlighted, circled, in red. The electricity bill is astronomical, Arthur, he said one evening, his tone accusatory. Are you running your power tools all day? I haven't used the workshop in weeks, Mark. My voice was tight, defensive. Well, something is draining the power, and we can't afford it. He used that word a lot, but he meant him and Sarah. I was just the drain, the leak in their perfect life. I started hiding my cherished tools, the ones Eleanor bought me, the vintage hand planer, the Japanese saw. I kept them under my bed in the guest room. It felt ridiculous, hiding things in my own house. But I felt a growing fear, a fear that Mark would sell them. Or just throw them away. He had no respect for the past. No respect for the work I had done. No respect for me. He only cared about the shiny new future he was building on my foundation, and I was in the way. One evening I overheard them talking. I was coming down the hall. They thought I was asleep. The door to the living room was cracked open. He's just taking up space, Sarah, Mark hissed, his voice low and venomous. He contributes nothing. He watches the kids. Mark, Sarah said, her voice weak, a pathetic defense. We could hire a nanny for that. A real one. This house is worth a fortune, and he's living here for free. Free. The word stung. After a lifetime of lower. After building the very walls they stood in. I stood in the darkness, listening. My heart pounded. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. They were erasing me from my own home, and my own daughter was letting it happen. The disrespect became casual, automatic, effortless. I was making dinner one night, a simple stew, Eleanor's recipe. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and comforting. Mark walked in, sniffed the air, and scowled. What is that smell? It's disgusting. It's stew, Mark. Well, it stinks up the whole house. We're ordering Thai. He turned and walked out, leaving me standing there with a pot of hot stew, a reminder of a life he despised. I ate alone that night. In the kitchen, the silence was heavy. The betrayal was quiet, but it was growing louder every day. Back in the kitchen, the confrontation, Mark laid out his case against me. We have expenses you can't even fathom, Arthur, Mark said, his voice dripping with condescension. He spoke slowly, like I was a child. He listed them, a litany of burdens. The kids' private school tuition, which is essential for their future. The car payments. They both drove luxury SUVs. The property taxes on this place. He sighed dramatically. It's bleeding us dry. Property taxes. That one stung. A cold realization settled in my gut. I actually paid those myself. Directly to the county. Every quarter. On time. I never told them. I thought letting Mark feel the responsibility of the house was important. It seemed I was wrong. He didn't feel responsibility, he felt resentment. And he was lying straight to my face. Why? It wasn't ignorance. This was malice. This was a calculated move. We appreciate you watching the kids, Mark continued as if reading from a script. His tone flat, emotionless. But that doesn't translate into dollars. Babysitting. Is that what raising my grandchildren was? He leaned closer. The smell of his expensive cologne was suffocating. This is a large house, Arthur. It's valuable real estate. He looked around the room, not seeing the memories, just the dollar signs. And frankly, you're not pulling your weight. Not pulling my weight. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at the beams in the ceiling. I set those beams. I built this stability. And now, it was being used against me. My life's work dismissed as charity. What exactly are you proposing, Mark? I asked, my voice hardening. I knew the answer, I just needed to hear him say it. I needed to see the depth of his greed. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. He had practiced this, rehearsed it. We need you to start paying rent. Rent. In my own house. The audacity was staggering. I waited, expecting a reasonable number. Something symbolic. Something I could manage. How much? I whispered. $2,000 a month. $2,000. It was absurd. It was almost my entire monthly pension. He knew that. He had seen my bank statements. This wasn't a request. It was an eviction disguised as a lease agreement. They weren't just asking for money. They were asking me to leave, to disappear. I looked at Sarah, my little girl, the one I taught to ride a bike in this driveway, the one who used to help me sand wood in the workshop, her blonde hair falling over her face. Help me, Sarah. Tell him this is wrong. Tell him this is our home. Tell him I'm your father. I waited for her to speak up, to defend me, to defend us. The silence stretched, tight and brittle. She finally looked up. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. No fire. No fight. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Mark. Dad, she murmured, her voice trembling. Mark is right. She chewed on her thumbnail. The nervous habit she'd had since childhood. The pressure is immense. She took a shaky breath and delivered the killing blow. We can't keep supporting you, supporting me. The betrayal hit me harder than Mark's arrogance. My own daughter saw me as a burden. The realization was a cold, sharp pain in my chest, a physical ache that stole my breath. I felt suddenly very old, very tired. I had lost her. I had lost my daughter, and I didn't even know when it happened. Mark saw the hurt in my eyes. He smelled blood in the water. He pressed his advantage. His voice rose, filling the room, energized by his own audacity. It's simple, old man, he yelled. He slammed his fist on the oak table. The silverware rattled violently. My silverware, my table. This isn't a charity. The free ride is over. It's time you faced reality. Reality, his reality. A reality where I didn't matter. He stood up, looming over me. His face was red, tight with anger. The man I had welcomed into my family now looked at me with pure contempt. I'm giving you 1 week, he spat. The words dripped with venom. Final. Pay the rent or get out. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one Eleanor loved so much. Tick, tock. Time moving forward. Leaving me behind, I looked around the room. I saw Eleanor everywhere. In the curtains she sewed, in the color of the walls we painted together, in the height marks of Sarah etched into the doorframe. This house was more than wooden bricks. It was my life, my legacy. And they were throwing it all away. I stood up slowly. My knees protested, the joints aching. I looked Mark straight in the eye. He expected me to beg. He expected me to fold. He expected me to break. I didn't. All right, I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but it was steady, calm. I'll leave. Mark smirked, a cruel twist of victory on his lips. He thought he had won. Good, he said, sitting back down. Dismissing me. Don't bother trying to take any of the furniture. We need it. The furniture I bought, the furniture I built, it didn't matter. Sarah let out a small sob. A pathetic sound, but she didn't move. She didn't defend me. She didn't look at me. She had made her choice, and she chose him. I turned and walked down the hall, to my small room. The guest room, my prison cell. I felt the weight of every year I had lived here pressing down on me. The walls seemed to close in. I pulled out my old suitcase, the worn leather one I took on fishing trips with Eleanor. It was dusty, unused for years. I packed my clothes, the few cherished tools I kept hidden under the bed, the vintage hand planer, the Japanese saw, and the picture of Eleanor from my bedside table, her smiling face, her bright eyes. It felt like I was betraying her too, leaving her behind in a house filled with coldness. But I couldn't stay. Not anymore. I walked out the front door an hour later. The night air was cold and crisp. The stars were bright. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I might have broken down right there on the porch I built. The porch where Eleanor and I used to sit and watch the sunset. The porch where I taught Sarah how to tie her shoes. I got in my old truck. The engine sputtered to life. Reliable, steady, more loyal than my own family. I drove away from my home, my life, everything I had built. I checked into a cheap motel a few miles away. The room smelled like stale smoke and regret. The carpet was stained. The paint was peeling. The neon sign outside flickered. Orange, gray, orange, gray. I sat on the edge of the bed. I stared at Eleanor's picture. The flickering light danced across her face. They turned on me, Allie whispered. The tears finally fell, hot and fast. Our own daughter. I felt a profound sadness, a deep, aching loss. It wasn't just the house. It was the family I thought I had, the future I thought I was building. It was all gone, shattered. But beneath the sadness, something else was stirring. A cold, hard resolve. I was a builder. I fixed things. And I wasn't going to let Mark tear everything down. I wasn't going to let him win. Mark thought he was in control. He thought he held all the cards. He thought I was weak, an old man, easily broken. But he had forgotten, or perhaps never knew, one crucial detail. A detail that changed everything. A secret I had kept for years. Eleanor and I bought this land when we were young, full of dreams. We built this house, nail by nail. Together. When Eleanor got sick, we made sure everything was in order. The house was paid off. Completely. We didn't owe a dime, and we put it solely in my name. It was a safety measure. Something our lawyer, old Mr. Abernathy, suggested years ago. Mr. Abernathy was sharp, thorough. He specialized in asset protection. Keep it clean, Arthur, he had advised, peering over his glasses. Protect the asset from any potential business liabilities. Back when my contracting business was active, back when I thought I needed protection from the outside world, I never realized the threat was already inside. Sarah and Mark never asked to see the deed. They never bothered to check. They assumed, because I was old, because I was quiet. They assumed I was. They likely thought I had added Sarah's name to the title years ago, or that it was automatically hers, her inheritance. They were wrong. Dead wrong. They saw me as a burden, a charity case, an unwelcome reminder of the past in their shiny new future. They never saw the truth. They never saw me. They hadn't just kicked out an old man. They had kicked out the owner, the landlord, and they were about to find out the price of their arrogance. The rent was about to come due. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange sense of clarity. The grief was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but the path forward was clear. I knew what I had to do. I needed help. I needed a shark. If this story has your heart racing, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Every click helps us keep uncovering stories that deserve to be heard. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. I knew exactly who to call. Someone who knew the value of a home and the cost betrayal. I called Linda Thompson. Linda was an old friend of Eleanor's, a sharp, no-nonsense real estate agent. She knew the neighborhood better than anyone, and she despised bullies. "Arthur, it's so good to hear from you," Linda said. Her voice was warm and familiar, a comfort in the cold morning. "How are you? How are Sarah and the kids?" "Linda," I said, cutting her off gently. My voice was steady, businesslike. "I need your help." "Anything, Arthur. What is it?" "I need you to sell my house," I said. The words felt strange to say out loud. "And I need you to do it quickly, and very, very quietly." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Sell the house? Arthur, what's going on? Are you moving? Are Sarah and Mark moving?" "They don't know," I said. "And they can't know." I told her everything. The demand for rent, the ultimatum, the ultimatum, the ultimatum, the yelling, Sarah's silence. I recounted the conversation verbatim. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. By the time I finished, Linda was furious. I could hear the anger vibrating in her voice. "That arrogant little parasite," she fumed. "After everything you've done for them, in your own house. How dare he?" Her rage was validating. It confirmed I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. "He doesn't know it's my house, Linda," I explained quietly. "They think it's theirs. They think they inherited it." Linda let out a low whistle, a sound of realization. "Well," she said, her tone shifting from anger to strategy, "they are in for a rude awakening. Don't you worry, Arthur. We'll take care of this." Her voice buzzed with excitement. "The thrill of the hunt. We'll make this the fastest, most profitable sale this town has ever seen." Linda moved with terrifying efficiency. She was a force of nature. 2 days later, she called me back. I was sitting in the motel room, eating a stale donut. "Arthur, the market is absolutely insane right now," she said. I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "I did a discreet appraisal. I didn't even go inside." She explained how she used the old floor plans I got from Mr. Abernathy's office. The exterior assessment. The neighborhood comps. Your house, Arthur. With the land, the condition it's in. We're looking at around $900,000. Maybe more if we start a bidding war. $900,000. My hands trembled. The number was staggering. I never cared much about the money. The house was always just a home. But now that money represented freedom, justice, power. "I don't want a bidding war, Linda," I said. My voice was firm. "I want it fast and quiet. I don't want Mark and Sarah to find out until the sale is finalized. Until it's too late." "That complicates things," Linda admitted. Her tone turned serious. "We need access to the house for serious buyers. Showing a house without the occupant's knowledge is tricky. It's risky. This was the first hurdle, the logistics of secrecy. They both work," I said, thinking quickly. "Mark is in the city from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Sarah works part-time at a boutique, usually from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. The kids are at school. I laid out their schedule, their routine. You have a window, a narrow window. And if they come home early," Linda asked, skeptical. "If a neighbor sees us," Mrs. Gable across the street sees everything. Mrs. Gable, a sweet woman, but nosy. A risk factor. "We'll have to risk it," I said, my resolve hardening. I still have the keys. The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine operations. I felt like a spy in my own life, a ghost haunting my own home. I would meet Linda at the house during the narrow window. We had to be quick, quiet, leave no trace. It was agonizing. Every time I stepped through that door, memories assaulted me. The ghost of Eleanor laughing in the kitchen. The echo of Sarah running down the hall on Christmas morning. The scent of sawdust and wood polish that used to permeate the air, now masked by the sterile, expensive candles Sarah favored. The house felt violated, tainted. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a transaction. One afternoon, while Linda was showing the house to a potential buyer, a young couple, expecting their first child. They seemed genuinely charmed by the craftsmanship. We had a close call, a terrifyingly close call. I was waiting in the workshop, keeping watch. when I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart pounded against my ribs. A sudden, frantic rhythm. It was too early for Sarah. I peeked through the garage window. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light. It was Mark. He was getting out of his car, looking agitated, talking loudly on his phone, arguing with someone, probably a creditor. He was home early, and we were trapped. "Linda, he's here," I whispered into my phone, ducking below the window line. My voice tense, shaking. "We're upstairs," she whispered back. Panic edged her voice. "In the master bedroom. Stall him, stall him. How?" I had to think fast. I quickly slipped out the side door of the garage. The hinges squeaked loudly. I froze, listening. Mark was still on the phone, still yelling. I walked around the front of the house, trying to look casual, like I had just arrived, like I belonged there. "Mark?" I called out, forcing a brightness I didn't feel. "What are you doing? Home so early?" He looked startled, shocked to see me. Then his expression darkened into a scowl, the contempt returning instantly. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" he demanded, his tone sharp, accusatory. "Come to pick up the rest of your junk." I thought I told you to get out, the casual cruelty of his disrespect. It was automatic, effortless. It still stung. "I just needed a few specific tools from the workshop," I lied, gesturing vaguely toward the garage. "Things I need for a small job. A small job. My life reduced to small jobs and cheap motels." "Well, hurry up," he snapped, checking his expensive watch. Impatient, annoyed, "And next time, call first. You can't just show up here unannounced." He paused, looking at me with narrowed eyes. He jabbed a finger at me. "This is my property." My property, the words echoed in my head. The arrogance, the entitlement. The irony was bitter. "Of course," I said, biting back the retort that burned my tongue. The truth that simmered beneath the surface. I walked back toward the garage, my hands shaking with suppressed rage. I waited until I heard the front door close, the lock clicking into place. Then I signaled to Linda. The coast was clear. She and the buyers slipped out the back door a few minutes later, looking flustered, rattled. The young couple looked nervous. It was too risky. We couldn't rely on their schedule. We couldn't keep playing this game of cat and mouse. "We need a different approach, Arthur," Linda said later that day. We met at a small diner. Her voice was tight with stress. She stirred her coffee nervously. "That couple loved the house, but the rushed viewing put them off. They felt like we were hiding something." She was right. We were hiding something. "The truth. What do you suggest?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I have a contact," Linda said, lowering her voice. "An investment company. They buy houses cash, no contingencies, and they close fast." "Fast is good," she explained the process. "They didn't need multiple viewings. They look at the fundamentals, the location, the structure. They were less emotional than private buyers." "They're sharks, Arthur," she warned, "but they move fast. Will they offer a fair price?" I asked, worried. I didn't want to give the house away. It was Eleanor's legacy. "They usually offer slightly below market value," Linda warned, "because of the speed and convenience. But given the situation, it might be our only option, a lower price versus the risk of exposure." I weighed my options. If Mark found out, he could claim tenant rights. He could damage the property out of spite. He could drag this out for months. Speed and certainty were more important than maximizing every last dollar. "Set the meeting," I said. The decision made. 2 days later, Linda brought the investors to the house. The lead investor, Mr. Harrison, a man in an expensive suit. Cold eyes. He walked through the house with 2 associates. They were efficient, professional, utterly unemotional. They checked the foundation, the wiring, the roof. They barely looked at the decor. They didn't see the memories. They didn't feel the history. They saw an asset. Not a home. It was exactly what I needed. But it still hurt. That evening, Linda called me at the motel. The neon sign buzzed outside my window. They made an offer. "Arthur," she said. Her voice was calm, relieved, triumphant. I held my breath. $900,000. Cash. Closing in 2 weeks. I closed my eyes. A wave of relief so profound it made me weak. It was done. The house was sold. They hadn't lowballed me. Linda had worked her magic. Accept it, I said. The words catching in my throat. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I stayed in the motel, pacing the small room, waiting for the axe to fall, waiting for the phone to ring. The isolation was difficult. I missed my grandchildren terribly. Timmy's laugh, Susie's stories, but I held on to the memory of Mark's smirk, the image of Sarah looking away, the sound of his voice telling me to get out. The betrayal fueled me. It kept me strong. I wasn't weak. I was a survivor. A few days before the closing, my phone rang. The screen lit up. It was Sarah. My heart leaped, a foolish hope blooming in my chest. Maybe she had come to her senses. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she was sorry. Dad? Her voice was small and shaky. She was crying, real tears this time. Sarah, sweetheart, I'm here, I said, my voice softening. The old habits dying hard. Dad, you have to come home, she sobbed, the sound tearing at my heart. Mark is furious. Furious. Not regretful. Not sorry. Furious. He said, if you just apologize and agree to pay something, even just a little, maybe $500 a month, you can come back. She pleaded with me, begged me. Please, Dad, don't be stubborn. Just apologize. Apologize. For what? For being kicked out of my own home? For being treated like a worthless burden? For building the very roof over their heads? They still didn't understand. They still thought they held the power, that I was the one who needed to bend, that I was the one who was wrong. The realization hit me harder than I expected. The gap between us was vast, uncrossable. Sarah, I said, my voice firm but impossibly sad, the hope vanishing, replaced by a cold reality.
I will not apologize for being mistreated. Mark made his choice.
I paused. The next words hurt the most. And you made yours when you stayed silent. But Dad, she cried, her voice rising in panic, where will you go? What will you do? You can't survive on your own. The irony was bitter. The assumption of my weakness. It persisted even now. They thought I couldn't survive without them. When they were the ones surviving on me, that's not your concern anymore, I said. The words were harsh, final, and I hung up. My heart was breaking, shattering into a million pieces, but I knew I couldn't go back. Going back would mean accepting their version of reality, a reality where my dignity had no value. A week later, Linda met me at the small diner, the one where we planned the sale. She slid a thick envelope across the table. It was heavy, substantial. It's done, Arthur, she said, smiling gently, her eyes shining with victory. The sale closed this morning. The money has been wired to your new bank account. I looked at the envelope, the final paperwork, a confirmation of the wire transfer for $900,000. It felt unreal, surreal. In one swift move, I had taken back control of my life. My legacy. What happens now? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The new owners want possession quickly, Linda explained. She took a sip of her coffee. Mr. Harrison is planning extensive renovations. They want to start immediately. She looked at me, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes, a hint of mischief. They gave the occupants a standard 30-day notice to vacate. It was delivered by courier this afternoon. I imagined Mark's face when he opened that letter. The shock, the confusion, the dawning horror. The thought brought a grim satisfaction. But the victory felt hollow, empty. I thought about Timmy and Susie. This wasn't their fault. They were innocent victims, casualties of their father's greed and their mother's weakness. Was I punishing the children for the sins of the parents? The thought tormented me, the collateral damage of my actions. I pushed the thought away. I had to protect myself. Mark had brought this upon himself. I would take care of the children later, on my own terms. The next few weeks crawled by. I moved out of the motel into a small, furnished apartment across town. It was quiet, peaceful. The walls were thin. The furniture was cheap, but it was mine. It wasn't home, but it was a start. I waited for the fallout. I knew it was coming. Mark was not the type to go down quietly. I heard through Linda that Mark had tried to fight the eviction. He hired a lawyer, a slick, expensive lawyer, claiming fraud, claiming tenant rights, claiming everything he could think of. He tried to block the sale, to reverse the transaction. But it was useless. The deed was clear. The sale was legal. Mr. Abernathy's paperwork was ironclad. I was the sole owner. They wasted precious time and money, denying the reality of the situation. Time they should have spent looking for a new place to live. Their arrogance was their downfall. Exactly 30 days later, the storm broke. The eviction deadline arrived. I was sitting in my apartment, reading a book on woodworking techniques, when my phone started ringing incessantly, the sound jarring in the quiet room. It was Mark. I let it ring, watching the name flash on the screen. He called back immediately, again and again, the persistence of a desperate man. Finally, on the 5th call, I answered. "What did you do?" Mark screamed into the phone, his voice frantic and hysterical, a high-pitched shriek of pure panic. I could hear chaos in the background. Shouting, things breaking, the sound of children crying, the sound of a world collapsing. I held the phone away from my ear, letting his rage wash over me, a storm that could no longer touch me. I was safe. I was secure. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mark," I said calmly, my voice steady, emotionless. "Don't play dumb with me, old man," you shrieked, the desperation cracking his voice. "There are moving trucks outside. There are people here saying they own the house. They said we have to leave. Now." He was hyperventilating, gasping for air. "The sheriff is here to enforce the eviction." I could hear Sarah wailing in the background, the sound of utter despair. "Mark, please, just calm down. We have to pack. Think of the children." "Calm down?" Mark yelled, his voice cracking under the strain, the fury turning into terror. "We're homeless, Sarah, and it's his fault, that conniving snake." He turned his attention back to the phone, the venom returning to his voice. "Arthur, you fix this. You call these people and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them we live here. Tell them this is our house." The delusion was staggering, even in the face of undeniable reality. "But it's not," I said, my voice cold and steady. The truth finally spoken aloud. Not anymore. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. The chaos in the background seemed to fade away, replaced by a chilling quiet. A moment of realization. What are you talking about?" Mark stammered, the arrogance draining from his voice, replaced by sheer, naked panic. "You told me to pay the rent or get out, Mark," I said, the words echoing his own cruelty, the ultimatum returning to haunt him. "I chose to get out." I paused, letting the truth sink in. "And since I couldn't live there anymore, I decided to sell the house." "Sell the house?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief, the shock vibrating through the phone. "You couldn't sell the house. It's our house. Sarah's inheritance." The assumption, the entitlement. It was finally crumbling. "It was never your house, Mark," I said. The truth, sharp and undeniable, a blade twisting in the wound. "It was my house. Eleanor and I built it. The deed was always in my name. I delivered the final blow. You never bothered to check. You were so blinded by your greed, so sure of your control, that you never saw me. You just saw a weak old man you could push around, a burden you could discard." Mark was sputtering, unable to form coherent words, the sound of a man drowning. But the money," I gasped. The greed, persistent. A disease that clung to him even in the face of total ruin. "Where's the money? We get half, right?" "Sarah gets half. I sold it for $900,000, I said, savoring the bitter irony, the number that represented my freedom and their ruin. "And it's all mine. There is no we, Mark. Not anymore. You can't do this to us," Mark roared, the desperation turning back into futile rage, a cornered animal lashing out. "We have children. Where are we supposed to go? We have no savings. You know that. They had no savings because they lived beyond their means. Luxury cars, private schools, fancy restaurants, all while living under my roof, assuming the gravy train would never end. That, I said, my voice cold as ice, is not my concern anymore. You made it very clear that I was a burden, that my contribution meant nothing. I paused, the silence heavy with consequence. You wanted financial independence from me? Congratulations, you have it. The words hung in the air, sharp, final. You wanted me out, Mark, and now you're out too. I delivered the final lesson. The moral of the story: you should have been kinder. You should have remembered that respect is the foundation of any home. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, the adrenaline surging through my veins, but I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. A quiet calm. The battle was over. The foundation I had built, though shaken, had held firm against his greed. The fallout was swift and brutal, a devastating consequence of their choices. With an eviction on their record, and their savings depleted by their extravagant lifestyle, and the futile legal battle, Mark and Sarah couldn't afford the rent in our neighborhood. They ended up moving into a small, cramped apartment on the other side of town, the kind of place they used to look down on. The kids had to leave their private school. The life they had built on entitlement crumbled into dust. I heard through Linda that the stress and the financial pressure shattered their marriage. Mark blamed Sarah for not convincing me to give them the money, for not securing her inheritance. Sarah finally realized the monster she had married, the greed and arrogance that had cost them everything. They separated within a year. The divorce was messy, bitter. I felt no joy in their misery, no sense of triumph. It was just a sad, inevitable tragedy of their own making. As for me, the $900,000 gave me a freedom I had never known, a new beginning. I bought a small, comfortable cottage near the lake, far from the memories and the pain. It was quiet, peaceful, the sound of water lapping against the shore. It was entirely mine. But retirement didn't suit me. I was a builder. I needed to work with my hands. I needed the smell of sawdust. Before I settled into my new life, I went to the bank. I met with the trust officer, David Chen, a precise man, detail-oriented. I set up a trust fund for Timmy and Susie, depositing $200,000 for their education and future. Mark and Sarah would never be able to touch it. It was protected, secure. It was my way of ensuring that my grandchildren would have a solid foundation, despite their parents' devastating choices. It was the legacy I chose to leave. I used a portion of the money to open a small woodworking workshop. I specialized in custom furniture, handcrafted pieces made with love and care, the kind of things that last a lifetime. I named it Eleanor's Legacy. It became my sanctuary, my new home. The smell of sawdust and wood polish filled the air, a comforting reminder of the life I'd built with my wife. The scent of home. I never reconciled with Sarah. The betrayal was too deep, the trust too broken, the wound too raw. I couldn't forget the look in her eyes when she sided with Mark, the silence when I needed her voice. I saw her once, years later, at a grocery store. She looked tired, worn down by life, the sparkle in her eyes extinguished, the brightness dimmed. She was with Timmy and Susie. They had grown so much. They saw me, and their faces lit up. A genuine joy. They ran to me, hugging me tightly, calling me Grandpa. I hugged them back. My heart swelled with love. Sarah watched us, her eyes filled with a profound mixture of regret and longing, a sadness that mirrored my own. We exchanged a brief, awkward greeting. "Hello, Dad." "Sarah?" The chasm between us was too wide to cross. The words left unsaid hung heavy in the air. I hugged the children one last time, and walked away, my heart heavy with the weight of what was lost, what could never be regained. Sometimes, late at night, when the workshop is quiet and the moon is high, I think about the house I built with my own two hands, the house where I thought I would grow old and die, and I remember Mark's words, "Pay the rent or get out." He thought he held the power. He thought I was weak. He didn't know that the true value of a home isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in love, respect, and dignity. I walked away from the workshop, locking the door behind me, the air crisp and clean, The stars bright in the night sky. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine. I had learned a hard lesson about family, greed, and the true meaning of home. Sometimes the only way to protect what you built is to let it go, and sometimes silence is louder than a scream. Thanks for listening. Please rate our story in the comments. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Your support means a lot because your time matters.